Thank you. Ashley Ames with the Analyst's Office. The proposal here before you is for the Professional Standards Program as part of CAL FIRE. It was part of the governor's January budget proposal. It's for $4.4 million initially, which is mostly from the general fund, and 14 positions that would establish this new Professional Standards Program in CAL FIRE's headquarters, which would include a new unit that would provide additional oversight of some of the internal investigations and adverse actions, as well as expand some of the manager and supervisor training. The Senate held this item open, and the Assembly approved the proposal on a 3-year limited term basis and included an annual reporting requirement. And we are recommending going with the Assembly version because this action is similar to our recommendation that the funding be on a limited term basis, and that's mostly due to uncertainty about the ongoing workload. We find that the proposal is reasonable, but there is some uncertainty just regarding what the needed resources will be on an ongoing basis, just largely as a function of the program being new, and additionally this will provide the legislature with opportunity to evaluate the program before committing ongoing resources.
Thank you. Ms. Costa.
Thank you. We continue to support our proposal. As the analyst has noted, I think the distinction here is the nature of the positions and whether or not they're limited term or ongoing. We continue to believe it's necessary for CAL FIRE to have the ability to proactively educate and train their employees on professional standards. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. Senator? Senator Leno.
I would move the Assembly action. Break the ice.
So moved. Great.
No need.
Second.
No need.
Do we have a, I guess, a 5-0, 4-0 vote? Thank you. We're gonna hold this vote open till next week. Sorry. But we should establish. Thank you. We should establish quorum. So.
See, it didn't count anyway.
So we're calling roll. So Assemblymember Ting.
Here.
Assemblymember Gonzalez. Present. Assemblymember Bloom.
Here.
Assemblymember Obernolte.
Here.
Assemblymember Olson.
Here.
Senator Leno.
Here.
Senator Laura.
Here.
Senator Hancock.
Here.
Senator Bates. Here. Senator Nielsen. Okay. All right.
Thank you. We have a quorum. So we will hold this issue open until next week. Any other comments or questions on this issue? Okay, we're moving on to issue 6, bottle bill. Ms. Ames?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this proposal before you is for trailer bill language that would make several changes to the beverage container recycling program in order to address some of the recent recycling center closures and to improve convenient recycling opportunities for consumers. The Assembly action included several provisions that would increase payments that recyclers receive from the state, temporarily ease the burden on beverage retailers, that have been impacted by recent recycling closures, and would also authorize a pilot program that's intended to improve convenience. The Senate also approved a pilot that had slight differences, such as the sunset date and the provision of $100,000 to each jurisdiction that participates. Just by way of a little bit of background, since January 1st, about 330, or roughly 15%, of the convenience zone recyclers, or the recyclers within a certain radius of a supermarket, have closed. And this is problematic because it reduces consumers' ability to collect their deposit when they return a container. It also creates a burden on the supermarkets that, under existing law, must either choose to pay a fee or opt to collect the containers themselves in store. Additionally, many low-volume recyclers have been the ones that have been closing because they tend to have higher per-container costs. And then there's a few reasons that have contributed to these closures, but one of them includes some of the payments that come from the state through the Beverage Container Recycling Fund. There's a lag with how some of the payments are calculated, and so when market rates for recycled materials decline, that can cause recyclers to lose money as they wait for the payment rates of the state to catch up. Additionally, one of the rates for the cost of recycling that is used to calculate some of these payments was recently adjusted upward, and so that resulted in lower payments for recyclers as well. And so the Assembly language includes several provisions that would address these issues, mostly by adjusting how the payments are given to recyclers, which would largely increase them. It would also reduce this burden on the retailers by allowing them to have an exemption for some temporary period of time. And then finally, the pilot to re-examine how the state looks at convenience. We've recommended going with the Assembly package because we do think that the options make sense to us conceptually. We do just note that there is an existing structural deficit in the fund, and so as you work on the specifics of the language, you'll just want to be aware of that and not want to significantly negatively impact the fund.
Thank you. Ms. Costa.
Thank you. The administration doesn't support either of the packages. I'd note in the past the administration has put forward a more comprehensive package to deal with this. There are many complexities and many participants involved in this program, and we continue to want to look at a more comprehensive solution. I would note, as the analyst has specified, that the Beverage Container Recycling Fund is in a structural deficit, and so that is something to be aware of.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Assemblymember Bloom.
For Department of Finance, the reason the Assembly has a proposal that's been made is that a temporary compromise has been reached amongst a lot of the parties that you just identified. There is significant concern that some of the remaining recycling centers that exist at markets are going to close within a month or two if no action is taken. In fact, we were informed that that's a certainty. It's not a question whether it'll occur. It's a certainty. So I'm concerned that the department appears to be, I think there's certainly validity to looking at the long-term solution here, but I'm concerned that it appears that there is no concern over finding a short-term solution that keeps these recycling centers open. And, is that the case? Is there no concern over that? And if so, why is that the case?
The administration believes if we had a comprehensive package, it would both help the short-term as well as the long-term issues with this program. Our concern is by looking at only temporary measures, this action could actually accelerate the need for proportionate reductions to other recycling programs. So again, we would, and I'm looking to my colleague, I want to say that it was in 2014 we proposed a more comprehensive, and so the administration has been concerned about this for several years, and we have put forward proposals to more holistically deal with the program issues.
So does the administration then think that it's possible to work out a comprehensive solution prior to the possible closure of all of these centers?
We have offered the proposal in previous years.
Is the administration actively working on the on achieving a result now?
There are some within the administration. We didn't have a specific proposal within our budget this year.
I'll take that as a no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Assemblymember Bloom's questions. Ms. Costa, I'm mindful that the administration did have a proposal a couple years back. I should preface my comments by saying this is indeed a very complex issue and very challenging with a lot of stakeholders and no easy fix, clearly. But the administration wasn't able to get the support of either house, so nothing happened at the time. And in light of some of the concerns that Assemblymember Bloom has just mentioned, some of the realities that Ms. Ames has shared with us, given your opposition to both Assembly and Senate versions, given that you've come forward with no proposal since your last attempt a few years ago, which didn't have legislative support, are we to assume that you think the problem's gone away, not getting worse, going to fix itself? What does the administration think we should do here?
We would note the existing law includes mechanisms to reduce the funding and that we still stand by our comprehensive proposal. And our concern is when you embark on temporary fixes, we won't get to some of the structural issues within the program. And so we continue to support our previous proposal.
You might help me better remember, were there any compromises made through that proposal, given clearly there was some resistance? I don't know that that gets us anywhere.
I don't think it got to the point that compromises were being made. The legislative analysts did come out with a report that was generally in support of the administration's proposal, with thinking that it seemed to be sound on both a fiscal and a policy basis. But there was no agreement in the end, so the reform did not move forward.
And I would note for the Senate's proposal on a pilot program, our position is not with prejudice to that particular proposal. It's more that we'd like to see a proposal such as this as part of a more comprehensive package for this particular program versus one standalone portion that could possibly work at the reforms necessary within this.
So just to refocus here, the Assembly's proposal has the Senate's proposal in it, and then a few other things that are identified as interim reform proposals. You're suggesting that you might see some value in the pilot programs, though you don't want to go down the path of these interim reforms because it doesn't get to the crux of the problem.
That's correct. I think the distinction I would make amongst the proposals before us is that the pilot project is looking at possible reforms to the system as a whole. Pilots, by their very nature, would be trying to see whether or not this particular proposal might help some of the issues that we're experiencing in the fund. And again, without prejudice to that particular proposal, we would still want to see it within a more comprehensive package for this particular program.
But I just have to ask you once again, since we don't have a comprehensive and you're not offering a comprehensive, we're at a stalemate. Something needs to be done. Ms. Ames has just told us how these centers are closing. More are going to close. I don't know that inaction is something that we should all just accept. Ms. Ames, do you have any further thoughts on where we came from a few years ago? Your thoughts, it was suggested you did support the governor's proposal at that time. Was there any room for give and take, and how might we get out of this jam we're in?
Yes, we did analyze the budget proposal, I think, in 14-15, and we did find that it seemed like a reasonable approach. Obviously, was not ultimately adopted. After that, we examined the program a little bit more and issued our own report for some of the potential ways that the structural deficit could be addressed, but mainly focusing on the fund condition with that. And more recently, we did look at some of the recycling center closures and identified a few of the options available to try to address that, many of which do appear in the assembly version of the package.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Nielsen.
Finance, the interim reforms, do these include any fee increases? Is that a part of
The reforms proposed in the 2014-15 budget cycle did not propose fee increases by consumers when they purchase beverages.
Prospectively, what do you see in terms of the processing payments and handling fees? How would we be paying for those?
How would we be paying for them?
Yeah.
The processing payments, not the offsets.
Yeah.
Those are
Well, we use the existing fund balance. Is that what?
right, and they would be some of the payments that would be subject to proportional reduction.
Okay.
Should that happen?
But you don't see, and the administration doesn't want to proceed with any policy legislation at this point.
I'm sorry, could you
No policy legislation at this point?
Our proposal, we still stand behind the proposal we put forth in 2014-15.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the attention on this issue. Several of the closures of the recycling centers have been in my community, and it's not an impending crisis. They've already closed. So we have a current problem, and I'd be curious if the administration might be interested in a compromise where they could support the interim proposals contingent upon an agreed upon date by which we'd have a more comprehensive solution.
We'd need to take a look at it, but I mean, I think we're certainly open to something along those lines, depending on what the language offered and what the total package looked like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bates.
Just need a clarification on the discussion on the fee increase. Is there one that is part of the interim reform proposal? You were addressing the previous. So in terms of the interim reform proposal, is there a fee, and is that on consumer or manufacturer, if in fact there is one?
The Assembly proposal, as I see it, does not contain a fee increase.
On either?
On either.
You spoke in your answer to the original question, you spoke about consumer. But
Correct.
The issue here is the manufacturers have had a great resistance to the earlier comprehensive reforms. I understand. I wasn't here at the time, but understanding the history there, that was one of the big obstacles at that time.
There were several obstacles. That was one of them. The manufacturers, for example, proposed the phase out of the processing fee offsets, the subsidies.
But we're not speaking of that now in terms of any fee. It's on neither consumer or manufacturer in terms of reform or whatever administration is hoping for in this comprehensive package.
The administration's proposal in 14-15 did not include fee increases.
Okay.
It did propose a phase out of the processing fee offsets.
Thank you. Any other? Senator Nielsen.
Well, I see some merit generally in the Assembly version, but not if you were just going to cut it to the pilot program alone. That's not a solution, particularly for the rural areas. So but it seems like we've got to come up with some kind of solution for now. We do have some real problems all over California. The fee increase is a big concern.
As I would just restate what Ms. Costa said, is that we are committed to a reform package that addresses the concerns that are both short-term and long-term in nature.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to issue 7, residential centers. Sorry, Mr. Martin.
Thank you. So the governor's 5-year infrastructure plan, it proposes a major expansion of the California Conservation Corps residential centers. That over 5 years, it would be $171 million for the construction of 7 new residential centers and the replacement of 1 existing residential center in Ukiah. The cost per center is about $28 million and includes about $100,000 to $200,000 for the acquisition phase for each of them, then $1 million for the preliminary plans, $2 million for the working drawings, and then about $25 million per residential center for the construction phase. And we note that those costs could be higher if they're paid for with lease revenue bonds, which we understand is how the administration intends to pay for them. The current year proposal before you is for $200,000 for the acquisition phase for a new residential center in Napa, $100,000 for the acquisition phase in Pomona, and $100,000 for the acquisition phase in Ukiah. So the current year proposal is relatively modest. However, when we looked at the 5-year infrastructure plan, we felt that if the legislature approves these proposals this year, it would be signaling its intent to go along with the larger 5-year plan. The total increase would be from 1,537 to 1,757, or 220 new corps members. As we add these residential centers, that's an increase of about 14%. Now, currently there are 2 models. There are the residential centers and the non-residential centers, and the difference is the corps members live in dormitories at the residential centers, and there's dining rooms and kitchens there. And in the non-residential centers, they live in the communities around the center, and then they commute there. If this 5-year plan were approved, it would be a shift of about 40% of corps members being in residential centers to about 67% living in residential centers. So it's a policy shift. Our recommendation when we looked at this was that the legislature wait until it has more information on corps members' outcomes. We talked with the California Conservation Corps, and they said that especially in the area of education and community service, they do have some information that shows that they have better outcomes for corps members who are in residential centers. But we didn't feel that they made a compelling case that the outcomes, broadly speaking, are better, and that there's data to support that the investment in the residential centers is currently justified. We understand that they're collecting more information, and that in a couple of years they have more data about the outcomes for residential center corps members versus non-residential center. And so we're recommending the Assembly. We also note that we recommended approval of the $100,000 for the acquisition phase in Ukiah. That's to replace an existing residential center, and the current center is in such bad state that we can't renew the lease and keep it.
Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Thank you. We support the Senate version of this, which is consistent with the administration's proposal.
Thank you. Senator Leno.
I'm with Ms. Costa on this one. This is a great program, and I think the LAO may just have slightly understated the benefit of these residential centers. Information I have, I agree with you that these participants, these corps members in the residential centers, as opposed to the satellite facilities, do test better and perform better in both math and reading, that a significantly larger percentage of them go on to post-core education programs, qualify for scholarships. So then the question is it a worthy investment? Are we getting enough in terms of educational and social benefit results for the amount of money we're putting into it? I've got an estimate of about $25,000 per year for a core member. Do you have any idea of what we do invest in these youth in the program? And then could we compare cost in resident or in satellite?
Certainly. Andrew Sharfer, Department of Finance. Our figure that we've calculated is slightly higher for residential facilities. The operations costs are approximately $3.4 million in a residential facility, and they house between 80 and 90 core members. So that gets you to a average cost of between $38,000 and $42,000 a year.
Okay.
In a non-residential facility, the operations costs are about $2.1 million, and they house on average 60 core members, which gets you to an average cost of $35,000.
So not that much difference between the two?
No, because one houses more than the other, and the operations costs are not significantly higher because even in a non-residential facility, you are still staffing that facility. Of course, those are their operations costs.
Right.
Only.
Once the facilities are built.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. And Mr. Martin, you have any information that either concurs or disagrees with some of these figures?
The figures that they just gave you sound right to me.
Okay. Well, what did we celebrate a 40th anniversary? Was it last year? So, yeah.
That's correct,
Yes.
Senator.
No, I'm a big fan of the Corps. Statewide, we've got an extraordinarily successful program in San Francisco. We're changing lives around as a result. I participated in some of the 40th anniversary, and I think the governor has every right to be proud of the fact that he was a part of that creation 40 years ago. But I think this is an important step forward, and I would, whether we do it today or otherwise, encourage full investment in what the governor is proposing here.
Thank you. Senator Nielsen, and then